Welcome to my art channel. I'm Evelyn and I've been painting a series of book illustrations. My approach materials and color palettes are still constantly changing, but for this illustration from last summer, I've documented all of the process, from color sketches right here to pencil drawing, first paint layers and final details, and I thought it would make for a nice snapshot of my process at the time. I'm sketching in this Hanemühle bamboo booklet. The paper has a slightly fuzzy texture that's really pleasant to paint on, but also keeps me from going into too much detail. At this point, I already had the overall composition ready. You might have spotted my thumbnail sketches in the big sketchbook tour of 2025, where these kept popping up. I also knew the overall color concept I wanted to go for: a warm to cold, light to dark transition from one side of the illustration to the other. But what may be clear in my imagination can fall apart once I put brush to paper. So that's where these color sketches come in. I used gouache because I wasn't working at my actual desk where the acrylic paints reside, and also to challenge myself to think out of the usual paint box, with different pigments and restraints placed by limited palettes to experiment. This illustration is for an end paper, so the first image that greets you once you open a book, right under the cover. That means the composition leaves the center of the illustration simple, because that's where the book spine would distract from it. So similar to a book cover in consideration, but instead of a front and back, an end paper has to be more balanced on both sides. With my gouache and watercolor studies, I explored how far I'd want to push my warm-cold palette, and decided I liked having a more neutral, dark tone overall, keeping the warm light to just the door frame and some candles. Then I looked through my usual acrylic paints to see what would be a match for this. I've since changed my approach to choosing color palettes, painting my sketches and palette experiments directly with acrylics. So it is strange to look back at this painting process from months ago, but I think it still works. All my considerations from back then in watercolor and gouache can translate well into acrylics anyway. I wanted a base tone for the castle background and experimented with different combinations of browns and ultramarine blue for neutrals. Raw umber and ultramarine blue emerged as the winner, as it can create a nearly green tone that will go well with the plants that are part of the scene too. But I'll also be using burnt umber and ultramarine blue as a grey mix as well. Burnt sienna will also show up in the painting, but probably not as one of the main tones, as it's just a bit too saturated and warm. Though I do have it in fluid acrylics, which is easier to blend and mix with, so it will be mixed in here and there. I'll be working on the Arches oil paper, which I've used for smaller paintings in the past. Like the name says, it's intended for oils, but I found it amazing for acrylics as well. Very absorbent and giving everything a matte textured finish, which creates a unique look for the usually smooth and glossy acrylic paints. Exactly what I want for my cozy end paper illustration. I sketched with pencil, keeping my lines simple. More recently, I've been working on Arches hot pressed paper a lot, and there I can really shade in my pencil sketch to establish shadows early. But on the oil paper, the texture doesn't allow for much delicate drawing or shading. so I'm keeping it to just the line art itself. I'm using a sharpener that I'm a big fan of. I'm actually really bad at sharpening with a cutting knife, as I learned in art school, but I just never got the hang of it and find it quite distracting if I'm in the middle of drawing anyway. And this two-step sharpener by Kum can sharpen all of my pencils into this very long tip that works well for these tiny details on textured paper. In the book Fangs for Nothing by author Stephanie Holmes, a centuries-old vampire needs help decluttering and organizing his castle, which is filled with knickknacks, art supplies, pottery tools, and everything else he's accumulated and studied over the centuries. Enter our protagonist, Winnie, a professional organizer tasked with bringing some order to the chaos and help decide which swords to keep and where the tapestries should go, with a bit of time pressure as a vampiric family event is coming up and the castle needs to be in shape before that. And then hijinks and romance ensue. I took this very literal approach to the end paper, giving us a look at where we start out. Winnie literally entering the scene framed by warm light, with a room full of trinkets, and Alaric framed by cold moonlight on the right side of the image. It's a simple composition, but it lets us get to know the characters and environment without giving anything away that isn't in the first few chapters or even the book blurb. You don't want anything beyond that in the front of the book, after all. It also works well as an end paper composition, as it has a very clear left and right side to the image, and the center is mostly just little potted plants and books, where it doesn't matter so much that the book spine will be right there. Because this is just a simple line drawing, I did also draw some additional character studies in a separate sketchbook, just to familiarize myself with the faces. I reduced the graphite with a kneaded eraser to make sure I wouldn't have any residue of that mixed into my watery acrylic layers. I erased the lines that are in light areas of the painting much more than the ones in shadow. In the shadows I'll be using dark paints to cover the lines completely anyway, but in light areas lines can be distracting, as I might be using more transparent color layers. There are two ways to use a kneaded eraser, and I'm kind of showing both here. You can either tap it onto the paper to reduce a specific spot more, or you can form a little baguette out of it and roll it around the painting to kind of get a more even reduction everywhere. Now onto the arch oil paper for painting. This paper soaks up water like a sponge, so I'm using more diluted paint than usual, and instead of large washes, I go in with messy small brush strokes from the very beginning. The whole reason I'm using this paper is the texture, after all. I want everything to look a bit grainy and rough to match the messy state of the castle, so I want to emphasize the texture instead of covering it up, and small brush strokes are much better for that than an even large color wash. With acrylics, I usually go in and establish both the lightest and darkest areas of an illustration. Here that meant anything lit by that warm candlelight and the dark stonework, where I used brush lines to preserve my pencil sketch. In a way, this is an extension of the sketching process, but it's also the underpainting, a bit of a combination. The scene is filled with so many little objects, and so to not make it completely fall apart visually, I'm using a lot of earth tones and grays overall to unify the scene. You can see how the first paint layer is mostly ultramarine blue and raw umber mixed together for these various grays and browns. Burnt umber mixed into them the closer we get to the warm side of the illustration, and more ultramarine blue the more we move to the cool side. Just an exercise in patience at this point, and I'm using my acrylic paints nearly like watercolors when it comes to the water to paint ratio, before finally moving to more opaque layers. With those, I started focusing on the characters. I always start on details for character faces quite early, because if I mess them up, I might have to start over after all, so I never save the faces for last. I've never actually had to start an illustration over from the beginning, as I can usually paint over mistakes until I'm happy. But still, it's a fear I have, and an illustration really only comes together once I have the characters established. It's a back and forth. I painted Winnie's face and then toned down the light of the open doorway around her, so that she herself is the brightest and warmest point in this piece. Decisions like this just happen constantly while painting, and it's why I love the process so much. I can make sketches and studies and prepare my palette, but in the end, there's so much room within the actual painting process to explore and adapt. All my illustrations for this book will be part of a special edition for which a Kickstarter is launching quite soon. Stephanie's writing is really engaging and fun, playing with all these tropes, but also taking them seriously. And I'm honored that I got to illustrate several interior scenes and of course the second end paper at the back as well. If you're curious about the illustrated book, I've added a link in the description, and I'll also be sharing a couple more videos with my process for the other illustrations. Not all of them on this paper and with an evolving color palette. If you've seen my illustration process for the Rapunzel piece from last summer, this one actually has a quite similar approach, just much more detailed. It's really the paper that guides me. The Arches oil paper here and the Hahnemühle agave paper for Rapunzel. Both of these absorb a lot of liquid without buckling, and they make acrylics look very soft. Of course, the Arches paper has a much stronger texture overall, and I wouldn't use this for art where I want a sleek, detailed finish. Here I'm all about that roughness and brushy textures in the painting itself, and the paper still lets me create areas that are quite detailed. So it was the perfect balance for this. Speaking of paintings, I had so much fun with the painting within a painting. The scene on the canvas is described in the book. Our vampire here has spent his long life studying and practicing arts, from pottery to weaving to assembling model trains to oil painting. And isn't that incredibly relatable? If I were faced with centuries of time ahead, that's exactly what I'd be doing as well. What would your niche hobbies be that you get overly invested in for a few decades before moving on to the next? I just really like that overall idea and gave Alaric a lot of my own painting tools to work with. That's my own fancy table easel by Mabev, turned into a standing one for him to work on. My own wooden palette for him to hold paint tubes around my desk that I used for reference. Even some of the brushes in the background are exact replicas of my Korean calligraphy and painting brushes. Some of the cacti are based on my own potted ones. A lot of the books and random pots and trinkets are based on items that I can find in my own home. There's my favorite teacup I got at a flea market, and even a rolled up rug that is based on one I'd been gifted by my grandmother. It was really fun to look at all my own little collections to inspire background elements here. Even the window shapes and the masonry are inspired by photos I took at a cathedral and a castle in my home country. I always try and bring these personal touches into my illustrations. I also painted this one rolled up tapestry as an homage to the unicorn in captivity. Not saying he has the original one lying around his castle, but maybe he wove it as a kind of master study, and then, like oh so many artists, was unsatisfied and put it away in a corner with all the other forgotten or half-finished projects. You can see me here and there using pink and violet tones, not just on actual violet clothing, but just mixed into the shadows. That's because the actual book cover and design has a lot of magenta and purple in it, and I kind of always came back to that in all of my illustrations, just so that the art inside the book references the overall design as well. At some point I was a bit worried that I'd overdone it with the messiness of it all. But once I went on to my detail pass at the end with more opaque paint and more vibrant colors, I think it all came together. The paper texture doesn't distract from the details. Even tiny cacti and their spikes and needles can be painted easily. And overall the texture helps tie this whole illustration together, giving everything this kind of fuzzy look without, I hope, being a distraction. What do you think? Should I give this paper a try for a more detailed character illustration one day? I think it might be best for landscapes or background-focused illustrations, like this one, or larger alla prima portraits. Have you tried the arch oil paper in the past with oils, or like I did, in acrylics? What would you fill your castle with? Here I enjoyed adding all those final details to candles, though thinking about it now, I probably, even as an immortal being, wouldn't put those next to my rare antique books. Let's just say that he has some kind of safety measure in place somewhere for that. And of course, I'd have a cat in my castle as well to keep me company. I don't always work like this, but this illustration is a great example of me going from all of those earth tones and grey tones to more and more saturated colors as I waited until quite late in the process to really bring out pure colors. That also made sure that anything closer to us, the viewer in the foreground, wouldn't clash too much with the more grey-toned elements in the background, as you can see here with the pure paint on his palette compared to the muted colors of the books in the background. I really like how the burnt umber and burnt sienna of the underpainting beneath the stone masonry still shines through until the end and kind of left that transparent on purpose for a more glowing look. I'm really happy with the result with this first look into the book. If you like it as well, then give the Kickstarter a look, maybe put it on your waitlist, that would be a great help, especially if you're in the mood for a modern, witchy and illustrated vampire romance story. I hope you enjoyed this quite slow painting process, as I kept on just layering and adding more details and emphasizing brushwork. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.